Steve Lyons with the Oracle National Security Group. It's been my pleasure today to be the MC for the first four speakers and panels, and to steal a line from Mary Legier, your cruise director for the day. I'm going to turn this over to Dustin Gard-Weiss, the Associate Director for Enterprise at NGA, who's going to introduce the panel, and we'll go from there. Over to you, Dustin.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Steve. It's great to be back at GEOINT, and thanks for joining us for a panel and hopefully a discussion with you on both the challenges and opportunities that confront us as we operationalize the global GEOINT enterprise. You've heard from many of the speakers over the last few days about the imperative and urgency to better leverage and harness what each member of our global GEOINT enterprise brings to better support decision-making and ultimately our national and global security. So that's what we're here to talk about, right? Both the promise of and obstacles that stand in our way. And so by way of definition, let me say what I believe the global GEOINT enterprise is. And when I talk about the global GEOINT enterprise, what I'm talking about is our partners and talking about our customers who work in intelligence, defense, civil missions within the US, foreign governments, industry, academia, basically everybody here. On yesterday's panel, as I understand it, as I was in the audience, I heard there was some discussion, including my fellow associate director, about who might have the best job. So I'd argue that I unequivocally have the best job, and I'll tell you why. Because I have the privilege to moderate this panel, and I'm humbled to be joined on the stage by some amazing teammates. By the way, I originally had said partners, but after General Thomas's keynote, teammates is a better apt description. So today's panelists collectively represents the substance and reach of our enterprise. They've been involved in developing, creating interoperable capabilities, making partnerships more inclusive, and bolstering mission readiness. So without further ado, let me briefly introduce them, and then we'll get to the substance. To my right, Major General John Howard, Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment, was appointed Deputy Director for Commonwealth Integration within the Defense Intelligence Agency in January. Prior to this role, he served as the New Zealand Chief of Defense Intelligence, has had operational tours, Bosnia, Bougainville, East Timor, Afghanistan, earned degrees from Australian Joint Command and Staff College and the U.S. Army War College. I think you previously served at CENTCOM here in Tampa as well. And you were awarded New Zealand Order of Merit. To his right is Dave Applegate, Dr. Dave Applegate, who chairs the Civil Applications Committee, which oversees federal civil use of data from NTM and commercial systems. His home agency is the U.S. Geological Survey, where he serves as acting deputy director and associate director for national hazards. He also has experience on the Hill as a science fellow and professional staff member with the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, and earned his PhD in geology from MIT. And to his right, as I put my notes in order, right? Because of course no one sits in the order that my notes are written. Why would that be? Because there's no assigned seating. Lieutenant General John Bansemer is the Assistant Director of National Intelligence for Partner Engagement. U.S. Air Force officer, obviously, has served in a variety of intelligence positions in the U.S., Japan, and Germany, staff positions at the National Security Council Air Staff, and as Director of Intelligence at U.S. European Command. MS in Computer Science from James Madison University, and deep knowledge in military science from the Air Command and Staff College, Air War College, and as a National Defense Fellow at Harvard University. And to his right is Nicole Gibson, principal with PricewaterhouseCoopers, a founding member of their intelligence community practice. She now leads one of its fastest growing accounts. She brings to her role 2 decades of experience as a management consultant. She is an avid advocate for women in national security and has served on the executive committee of INSA. She earned her MA in public administration from George Mason. And last but not least is Gary Dunow, who is chief of NGA's international support team for Europe and Canada. He's previously served as NGA's Director of Career Services, NGA's Director of Analysis, and Deputy Director of International Affairs, and previously Deputy Director of Expeditionary Operations. He also served as an intelligence officer in the U.S. Air Force. So with that, well, let's get started. And so let me start with General Bansemer. You work with a wide range of partners, and we might say that partnership building has become sort of routine for many in the audience and for many across our enterprise. Can you describe some exemplar, standout, innovative efforts that have made partnerships more inclusive?
Maybe. There we go. So, thanks for that. And as I think of exemplars, I'm actually looking at 2 of them right now. So, to my left, John Howard, and out in the audience, Sean Corbett. And I actually, and we laugh, right? And you say, why am I pointing to 2 individuals? Because I think it's a representative of where we have tried to take partnerships and teammates, as we talked earlier about, from kind of the process piece to the people piece. And really, if you think about it, what they have done and what John in his present position has done is help us understand the impact of the policies we've put in place, understand the impact of the processes that we have in place on the people that have to live with it. So that, to me, is a pretty important aspect of this. The second piece that I would point to is the movement away from kind of bilateral kind of exchanges to much more multilateral exchanges. I think that is one of the most significant ones that I've seen. We used to talk a lot about the importance of building bridges, and I'm sure people probably still do. Building bridges is great, but the challenge that I have with building bridges is that sounds like the destination. We built the bridge, okay, mission complete. And really, building that bridge only gets us so far. And I also think, at least in my mind, I think of building the bridge as it gets me to one destination, when if we go back to what I talked about before, what we're really trying to do is to do something at a multilateral piece. So we in America, we have a problem with traffic circles, but I think it's actually an apt analogy, okay? I'd rather have a traffic circle with a whole bunch of off-ramps that allow us to bring data both ways into that traffic circle and across multilaterally, vice building bridges. So that's just a concept that I think about when I go through all of these pieces. The last thing I'll talk about for now, because I know that we have a lot of panelists, the last piece I'll talk about is, I mentioned earlier what Sean and John have done, which is help us start to understand the processes and the policy behind all of this. The other piece to this is the data. And right now, I would argue that we have gotten reasonably well, and I think reasonably good, I should say. We've gotten reasonably good at encouraging our analysts to write data at the right level, those types of pieces. Reasonably good. And we could have a disagreement, and we can talk about that later. I think the bigger challenge right now is how do we get it to the right people at the right time. So in the military, we talk, particularly our personnelists, they talk about getting the right person to the right place at the right time. To me, it's getting the right data to the right place at the right time. And if we can do that, then I think we will have really advanced the ball. So I'll stop there and allow some of our other panelists. Thanks, Dustin.
Thanks, General Bansemer. Following on that theme, let me ask Major General Howard a follow-on question, which is related. As you think about the U.S. and international partners and how we work together, sort of enterprise to enterprise, as we build those traffic circles, what challenges do you see, and where are we, I guess, in your experience along that trajectory, and sort of what are some of the easy things that we've tackled, or things that are confronting us, and what are those harder challenges that may be longer term?
Okay. How about that? Working? Okay, thanks for the opportunity. I want to start with the biggest challenge, which is culture. So kia ora, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou koutoa. Greetings. Greetings to you all. The ability to understand each other and operate at the speed of trust is what we seek to do. And that's not easy. If it was easy, Sean would not have had to come away from his family and live here, and I would not have to come here and eat donuts and drink bad coffee. It's not a choice, but it's a decision, because we benefit, the partners benefit from it, and you benefit from it. It's not, and I am a little flippant about it, but the reality is we need to understand the diversity that everybody has in their structure, in their command and control relationships, in the authority by which they capture data, share data, and even the architecture that we own. Now, of course, if you've got an industry that's providing one large consumer and the rest of us are feeding off it, that brings other challenges for us and smaller nations. But if you can understand that we may have access, placement, and more importantly, cultural diversity of thought, we'll have a stronger product as we go forward. None of that is easy. Having dealt with it at the national level, across the defence intelligence architecture and into other agencies, as soon as we step out of the operational domain, where there is a necessity to share, to integrate, we get stuck behind the beltway, as I'm learning, and we're dealing with more noise around let's slow decisions down, let's think more through what we know is probably the position that we need to be in. And being a Kiwi, of course, I want to talk about sport. if we can understand the difference between American football, rugby and ice hockey, then we can probably have a deeper discussion. The issue is, though, not everybody plays American football or rugby or ice hockey. The coalitions that we're going to be in and that we need to be in need to be broader and deeper. Sometimes, though, we still talk about football, rugby and ice hockey. If we can get ourselves to what is the sport for the coalition that we want to be in, how do we get the information moving to where we need to be, we'll be in a better place. There is a richness in the diversity that we have just sitting here. Tapping that's the key.
Thanks. We'll come back to that thought. Let me give Gary an opportunity to jump in. Following on this theme, as we talk about putting these sort of multilateral partnerships into action and actually doing it, we've talked about it. Can you talk about some of the operational challenges as well as sort of the misperceptions that you'd like to dispel in terms of actually putting these things into place?
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. So I'll continue to build on the General Thomas theme of team versus partnership. So if you think, before I start, if you think about any team in any sport, and I'm not going to pick one because I'll offend somebody, each team has players that are good at certain things, certain functions, but each team also has reserves. So think about that as I go through my comments. And I think there are really 5 misconceptions about partnerships and teams that serve as challenges to us operating as an enterprise. And the first one is the thought of quid pro quo. I think that is old school thinking, and we need to move past that. The concept of quid pro quo means each of us get the same benefit out of the relationship. And I don't think any partnership works that way. I think we need to talk about operational outcomes and not what you get, what I get, but what we get in order to achieve the objective of the enterprise that we work in. I think the second misconception is that bigger is better. I often hear when I talk to our partners, we see NGA as this big, monstrous GEOINT enterprise, and we're trying to keep up with you. And I would tell you, anyone who thinks that, don't try to keep up with us, because you have advantages by being smaller and more agile and quicker and able to innovate faster than we do. And that is necessary as part of the enterprise. We can't work if we all look the same and act the same and have the same approach. Which brings me to my third misconception, is that everyone must contribute equally. Without a diversity of approach to analytic problems and intelligence issues, and a diversity of inputs into those problems, which range from analytic methods to collection and source capabilities across the board, it doesn't matter how you contribute, it matters that you contribute and we get the right operational outcomes. The next one I would talk about is that we all have to have the same national security objectives. I think that, first of all, it's a false precept to think that we will ever all have the same national security objectives, because we all have individual national security objectives. And I think we have to make sure we're supporting those as we support this the objectives of the global enterprise, and are able to complete or accomplish both. And then the last one, to the general's point, the misconception is that we must speak the same language. Even within the English language, we don't always speak the same language. But I think when we get stuck on definitions, we slow down the progress of the enterprise. For example, if we try to define GEOINT within a multi-int environment the same way among 7, 14, 15 different nations, we're never going to be able to make progress, because we'd be stuck forever trying to define what that is. We each have our own ways of approaching it, and I think, again, focusing on that will take us away from the ultimate objective, which is the intelligence operations that we're trying to conduct as an enterprise.
To your point about language, Dr. Applegate represents the civil community on this panel, and I think that at times there's a language divide even within our own government between defense, intelligence, and civil. So can you talk about sort of the increasing demands placed on civilian agencies, and also sort of your expectations as you think about mission readiness and in that context of that civil community?
Absolutely. Well, and first off, really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Representing the civil side of government. It's true, we each have our sets of acronyms. I think yours might be even more dense than ours. But in terms of readiness, I mean, the key thing here is it's about taking on all comers. And we can't do that one by one. We've got to be able to do that with a really strong set of partnerships, and we have to have those in place when we're thinking about hazards. You know, we face a dizzying array of threats. Obviously, a very strong focus here on the human threats that are posed, but also a wide range of natural hazards. And in all of these cases, we're talking about security, we're talking about public safety. And it's the latter realm in which my focus lies in the natural hazards arena. And the key is we've got to be able to bring all the capabilities we have to bear if we're going to be able to deliver situational awareness. And GEOINT is absolutely central to bringing that situational awareness. When you think about an emergency operations center, when you think about the National Response Coordination Center, often it's that geospatial cell that's going to be where the really key situational awareness is coming in. It's going to be in that visualization, in that map kind of realm. Now, some of these cases we're dealing with no-notice events like an earthquake, so we're entirely operating, it's that left of boom is the terminology. And others we're dealing with, whether it's volcanoes or flooding events or even hurricanes, there's the preparation piece as well. But no matter what, you cannot be tapping into this truly incredible array of assets and capabilities. You know, we're not in a data poor environment here, right? We're in a data too rich environment. You can't tap into that in the moment. I mean, it's the sort of the standard thing we say when we talk about disasters. You know, that's not the place to be exchanging the business cards. Well, that's doubly so when you think about trying to tap into this range of assets, whether from overhead systems or others. You've got to have a mechanism in place, and that's the entity that I'm here representing, the Civil Applications Committee. It was set up actually under President Ford to create a space and a mechanism whereby the civil community can come together with the IC and to be able to work out, to both understand what one another is doing, to have those conversations, but also to be able to set the ground rules so that we can do all of that ahead of time. We're not trying to do that on the fly. And that also extends globally as well. We have the International Charter for Space and Major Disasters that's become an incredibly valuable tool for being able to, again, bring in a range of different capabilities that we might not otherwise be able to do. And this is a good government story, right? This is about leveraging assets and investments that have been made and being able to drive them towards a whole new set of purposes and capabilities. So it's that ability to facilitate understanding and ultimately then to be able to generate, whether we're talking image-derived products or high-resolution imagery, that can be then directly facilitating that response. And this is not just limited to disasters. I mean, we look at environmental change, environmental contamination issues. There's a lot of different capabilities that can be brought to bear. But when we do talk about, we talk about personal preparedness. We say that basically what you do before the event is going to determine your quality of life afterwards. And that's absolutely the same case when we're talking about this much larger set of collaborations to be able to deliver the very best situational awareness we can for the public safety.
Thank you. You talked about data, tapping into data more effectively and creating value from data. And so that leads to a good question for Nicole Gibson. You have the privilege of being our industry rep on this panel, so I'll throw all of the questions related to that your way. But as we sit either in the government or private sector, we're talking about creating value from data. And so what do you think? What more can we do to ensure that we create value and we recognize the value and we share that value across the enterprise?
Yeah, thank you, Dustin. And thank you all for so much for showing up for the last panel of the day, one of the last panels of the day. It's a great turnout. So when I was first given this question to think about, one of the first quotes that came to mind is one by Clive Humbley, who's a Brit, very well known in social sciences for marketing and customer segmentation work. And he famously said about 10 years ago, data is the new oil. And that is a term that's been hotly debated, lots of articles if you're on your phone right now Googling that. And one thing that I think folks have come down on agreeing with is that data has become a commodity. It helps organizations, whether you're in industry or government, to focus strategies and visions, and examine what investments to make. It can affect brands positively and negatively, depending upon how that data is used. And its increased monetization in industry is exemplified by the rising stock values of Google and LinkedIn and Facebook, et cetera. And for our community and our collective missions, while the means to gather the data comes at a cost, the value it kind of reminds me of the catchphrase in that old MasterCard commercial. It's priceless. So in 2018, how we recognize this value, I think, depends on three elements that are relatively simple and very commonsensical, but I think are really difficult in the implementation of them. So first, I think we really just need to understand the data. What are we looking at? What is its provenance? Why are we collecting it? What are we trying to use it for? And there are countless anecdotes across industry and government about data being used to support an action or a claim that wasn't necessarily the original intent of that data. So we all need to have a clear purpose and understanding of the data, not just collect it because we can. And I think secondly, we need to shift our thinking on how we operate with the data. And so traditionally, data has been housed in specific organizations, be that human capital, IT, CFO shops. But now it's become more embedded in everything we do. And I think this has really been underscored this week, both with Director Cardillo's comments yesterday with art and science, and also with Mr. Hartley and his comments with Fuzzy and the Techie, that we need to rethink how our offices work together and how teams are formed to solve mission and business questions. The cross-functional teams that are co-located and working together to understand mission processes, are really critical components to how we operate, and it's really going to be transformational in how we all move forward collectively. Similar to the DevOps environments that we're all very familiar with, being set up across the community, but not just for technical development. And finally, this point's been really hit hard home this week and last week at FCA as well, but we need to rethink how we approach training and education of our workforce. Around the idea of data. And I think this is something that's really, the pendulum has really swung the other way. I think a couple of years ago, all of us, were beating down the doors of MIT and Stanford saying, we're going to hire all the data scientists. That's the solution, that's what we're going to do. And I think, as I said last week too, you don't need a whole cadre of data scientists to solve every problem. Everyone needs to become more familiar with how to deal with the data and how that applies to their role and responsibility that they hold in an organization. I know Amazon is looking at how to get folks educated on machine learning 101. I know a lot of consulting companies, including ourselves, are looking at an analytic foundation that's part of what everybody learns. And so really embedding that as a part of what everybody does instead of a separate function is something that we all need to look at in training for the future. So while we continuously improve our understanding of the value of the data, we got to figure out how we share it with the enterprise, right? And I know this is something that Dustin and his leadership team is really working hard on, and three particular initiatives that I'm going to talk about are underway, and you all should know as part of industry that these are not platitudes of things that we're just talking about, but that there's real implementation plans behind this that the office is really working on. So first, looking at refocusing the global GEOINT enterprise to become a network of multilateral partnerships that are facilitated by NGA. And these partnerships will increase access to collective and unique resources and really foster global innovation, which is important as we continue to move forward as one organization. Second, leveraging the multilateral partnerships and begin to reinvent the needs and capabilities processes and moving from a single source needs process to multi-source capability network. And this will enable the enterprise to routinely share customer needs and again, better leverage the capabilities of the enterprise to address the specific needs of the customer. And finally, re-examining the governance structure that enables this sharing across the enterprise. And looking at the business of functional management, which includes clear understanding of enterprise priorities and goals and performance measures and underscore with communications, we can better highlight the capabilities and the power of the partnership and really speak as one voice. One thing that was said last week at the FCS symposium was that big data equals big change, and I think that's absolutely true. This is an amazing time for Team GEOINT, and we have amazing opportunity to really work together to drive data to decisions and actions. And I think starting with this work with the enterprise is one of the ways that we can continue to move this forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. I think a common theme, at least as I think about it, is trust. Right? I think General Howard, you mentioned sort of speed of trust, and so I would ask, maybe you can start, and then others can chime in about what can we do to build trust faster. because that's a significant impediment that stands in the way of our ability to share data, our ability to operate as an enterprise, or our ability to fill in the blank.
So it's often been said that you can't surge trust when you need it. A colleague spoke about sharing business cards when you get off the plane in a place where you need to do something. Trust fundamentally comes with understanding each other's culture and being able to give a little. But by that I mean not being hidebound by what you hold most dearest at times, as long as it doesn't breach a security challenge or national interest. You've just got to learn what each other is talking about and what you're actually trying to achieve. Pretty hard through some language barriers.
Any other?
So I think it's pretty difficult to establish trust without dialogue. And that dialogue is not engendered by having us separated in different containment areas where we come together once a week to have an analytic exchange. That makes it pretty difficult to do that. If we are in everybody's battle rhythm day after day, that fundamentally changes the paradigm, and now others that may not quite have understood what the value of this multilateral partnership can start to see that. Or we get those diverse views, right? We try to start analysis from the perspective of we don't have a monopoly on insight. I think that trust can be engendered by bringing in those diverse views, but again, that has to be done with, I think, a daily exchange of information.
I agree completely that you have to have the interaction in order to establish the trust. I did work for a one-star one time that came into first town hall with our agency, and the first thing he said was, I'm walking into this agency and I don't know very many of you, but I'm giving you a full cup of trust today, and it's up to you what you do with that trust. So he didn't ask us to earn his trust. He gave it to us from day one. Whether we spilled it or dumped it out or maintained it, that was up to us. So I think the approach to the trust equation is very important as well.
Okay, let's got some questions here. General Bansemer. Question is, the U.S. has a tendency, and by virtue of sort of the breadth, scope, scale, number of organizations involved within our community, to sort of overtax other smaller partners. Can you talk about the role that you foresee OD&I playing or another entity playing to help synchronize, orchestrate these increasing sort of multi-lateral, multi-community opportunities for increased partnership as we go forward?
Sure. So when I think about overtaxing, I go back, and there was a great point raised earlier about quid pro quo, right? Which is this expectation that for every analytic product of type A, we should get a similar analytic product of type A. The other piece I would suggest is it's not just the quid pro quo, but it can be asymmetric, right? So there is value from a team. It's not always from that analytic piece. It's also can be access. It can also be where we are stationed together. There are so many different types of contributions that the elements of a team make. So first of all, it's kind of setting reasonable expectations. So that would be one of the big pieces that I think we have to do. The second one is recognizing that there's going to be a difference in approaches sometimes, and that's okay as well. So those are kind of my first two quick pieces. As far as the steps that we are taking, I can't point to a discrete kind of effort that says, hey, here's how we're going to avoid overtaxing. We don't have this giant gonculator in the sky that says, oh, we've reached the maximum supply here. We don't have that. But I think that in general, what I have seen is that when we do work, we kind of start to feel and understand where the limits are of that particular contribution.
As a follow-on, there's another question, which is a perfect segue. And I'll start with Gary, and then maybe we can go General Howard and others. And more nations play soccer than football, ice hockey and rugby combined. We talked about quid pro quo. We've talked about trust. And General Bansemer, you alluded to some areas where other nations might bring something to the table. But so, can you provide, Gary, maybe a little more specificity from your perspective on what partners, what nations can bring to the table to be part of this enterprise?
Sure. So the last thing I think we want to do is play kids soccer, to use the sports analogy again, right? When something happens, we shouldn't all go running after the ball and trying to develop a capability against a country or an entity that we never worked before. We should be able to trust each other to share the data and do what we do best. That could be a topic. It could mean if I'm working Russia and you're not, you trust the analysis I give you about Russia. It could also mean a capability. So I believe we don't all have to work the same way on the same things, as I mentioned earlier. So it could be that I'm providing analysis, another partner is providing the source material that I need in order to improve my analysis. Another country may develop some software or algorithms that allow us to use our data better than we have in the past. That variety of approaches and variety of skill sets, each leveraging what we do best in the areas where we do it best, is what is going to make us function as a team, as an enterprise.
General Howard, any additional thoughts?
I would add that fundamentally relationships are key to how we make this go forward. I can see not teammates but friends sitting out there today. I can see Marcel sitting over there, Fred sitting over there. I know that I could go to both of you and say, no, don't do this or don't visit at this time, because we've got a trusting relationship, and the word wouldn't be overtax, it would be overwhelm. As a small nation, it's easy to overwhelm 4.5 million orcs sitting at the bottom of the world. So sometimes we need to think quite openly, let's have an honest, frank discussion about what's too much. We learn from that, then we can reorientate ourselves pretty quickly.
Any other comments from fellow panel members?
Well, just from the civil side of things, of course, we're very conscious of just how much that we've got to learn from the other countries in particular. And again, that comes to that trust comes through finding mechanisms to develop the connective tissue, where we're able to work and interface. So I think that openness to the fact that there are a very different set of circumstances, very different set of experiences, very different set of capabilities, and then finding mechanisms like the International Charter by which we can then tap into that is absolutely critical.
Okay, the next question takes this conversation a little bit of a different direction. There's been a lot of discussion about training, development, certification, tradecraft. Do you feel that our teammates are equally emphasizing training that helps to generate the insights from the data and how to manage and create value from that data that they're increasingly having access to?
Do you want to start that?
Please.
Yeah. I think it's really a tough nut to crack, I think, for all of us, regardless of whether we're in industry or government right now. Finding the right talent, finding the right talent that has the right clearances and so forth. I think we're all looking at a multi-pronged approach to clearing the folks that, training the folks that we have that have the right tickets right now, and then finding the next generation of people to bring into the workforce. It's a multi-layered thing that requires a lot of diligence and looking at different parts of the end-to-end process associated with the people we're bringing in. It's tough.
Any other thoughts on training, the role of training?
Can I just emphasize, in addition to the training, the words I'd use are cross-pollination. The more that you can cross-pollinate yourself across the enterprise, the better you'll understand the opportunities. From a small nation point of view, it's fundamental to how we grow our people. That means that when you're the leader, you've got to accept good people need to move. That's a cultural issue that we all have to embrace. Invest in tomorrow.
General Bansemer, you mentioned in your opening remarks about policy and challenges associated. Can you talk about any of the policy challenges to creating you sort of the roundabout, the traffic circle, and any thoughts on sort of the way forward there?
Sure. So I think the policy challenges that we have are ones that we've, in essence, grown up with over 70 years or 80 years, right? I've often told people that if you look at a rule or a policy that's put in place, it was put in place for a very good reason at the time. The challenge is that policies over time, they start to accrue and they start to conflict. And all of those pieces then start to kind of gum things up. But very rarely is the policy put in there to say, you know, let's put in a policy so that we never share with the Kiwis, right? That's never the intent. It was not the intent, but it ends up that way sometimes. So that's the first piece of it. The second one, and John and I were having this discussion right before we came in, it's a risk piece. Policies are usually kind of in kind of functional areas. So there are security policies. Security is going to be very concerned about any failure in security. We have IT policies. It can take a long time to get new software on a system. Again, it's done in a functional piece. But where is that overarching kind of risk management decision that also looks at the risk of not doing something? And I think that's another piece that we're going to have to continue to work through. I wouldn't say we're perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
General Howard, if you could change one policy, I'm going to put you on the spot. Magic wand. As General Bansemer gets closer to the microphone.
One policy. There's one really big policy. So there is a rule in the US called no foreign. And then there are the rest of us. Somewhere in the middle is yes foreign. Understanding what yes foreign means in an operational and strategic setting will allow US agencies to be deeply integrated beyond a level that we do at the moment. Now, there is nothing in that statement that should take away the need to know. We all have issues that we look after, and we all have things that we protect. But the reality is, if we're going to operate at the speed of trust, we need to challenge the status quo, and some of those rules were written when we were still under the shadow of the Cold War. Now, how we think about that collectively is going to be a really hard challenge. That would be the one that I would fire the biggest rifle I have at in the job that I have at the moment.
The reason I leaned forward is I was looking at Sean because he was like, only one? So he gave us a list of about 25, but I mean, clearly that is. I would like to just tell a story just for a second that's related to that. And it was something that we got on a trip to the UK. And it was a very simple document, and it was an historic document. And it said to the War Admiralty, you will share all very special intelligence with General Eisenhower and his staff. And it's almost a verbatim piece, and that was the entire issuance of the order. It's a nice story because it's, number one, true, and it also says, boy, why can't we get to that again, right? I agree with John. It's not about the aspects. I mean, every one of us in this room, right, we don't get access to all information. If there is somebody in here, good for you, but I don't know of anybody. So it's not about that. We can still work through the need to know and those aspects and the mission imperatives. But I do think that it's an exemplar of where we have come from.
It's a great exemplar. Dr. Applegate, any perspective on policy sharing from a civil perspective?
I think the big issue is that we think about these policies that we're trying to figure out how we can get information out. I changed it around a little bit, and one of the huge challenges we face right now is, kind of comes back to the traffic circle. How do we get the policies in place by which we can pull information in from this dizzying set of news sources, right? I mean, it's the crowd. And we're figuring out, there is that need for authoritative information. There's still hunger for authoritative information. And yet we know that, we know all the things we don't know, that speed of trust issue. Well, we know that the speed of information is way out ahead of that. How do you bring it to the level at which you can acknowledge it and trust it just enough to be able to harness it, so that then you can still provide that authoritative stamp and you can use it?
We haven't really talked about technology very much, which is interesting. So let me throw a technology piece on here, which is, it's long been held, or the belief has been, that technology has been the obstacle, right? That we could operate as an enterprise, but technology is in the way of either sharing data or accessing data or being able to collaborate. Now, I don't believe that technology is the impediment. So we can talk about how we can better leverage technology to enable our enterprise. Nicole, can I start with you and then?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think we have a lot of these tools in the enterprise to enable collaboration. One of my first engagements at the DNI many years ago was on A-Space, and the whole premise was we're going to have this platform built on Facebook that was going to enable collaboration. But I think it again comes back to the trust piece, because if you build it and they will come, that philosophy didn't exactly pan out at first in terms of the sharing of the information. So I think there are plenty, and there's just so much, so many things that are being demoed here this week to really underpin how technology can help with the collaboration and the information sharing. But there really has to be trust around the people that are going to provide that information and share that information to make it really effective.
So let me put a finer point on it. If you could have one thing that didn't exist today to enable our enterprise, what would that be from a technology standpoint? You can come back if you think about it. I'll go. Gary looks like he has a thought here.
Okay.
So,
Sure. Two thoughts. First of all, I don't think it's technology that's the issue. It's the security that limits how we use the technology that's the issue. I think everybody understands that. And as far as the one piece of technology I would put in place today, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. This is Michael Hales came up with this earlier, and we were having a conversation about this. There are so many policies right now, and it's so complex to try to understand who gets what under what circumstances, that if there was a technology that would automate how that data flowed, it would be very useful for the intelligence community.
any other?
Well, I do think there is a technology challenge. It is more than policy, okay? And you hit it, Gary, right there at the very end, right, with your solution, which is if we can get so often I started and I said getting the right data to the right place at the right time. I think that we fail in the right time because sometimes it's so hard to get it into the right place, i.e. the right network, get it onto the right network in a timely manner. So there is a technology element. Part of it is tied up in the policy. You know, I would love to get the policy and the technology folks in the same room because they would both point to each other, right? No, this is just fix it with the technology. Policy is saying, well, we can't do it because your policy prevents us from doing it. So I really think we got to work both sides.
Dr. Applegate, General Howard.
Oh, I think I'd come back to something said at the outset. It's not a problem of being data poor. We have these just massive, we now talk about them as cubes of data, and to be able to move away from some of the, again, it's the time issue, the time consuming, the analytical capabilities, to be able to truly make sure that we're not leaving stuff on the floor. And that's key.
Okay, in the minute and 45 seconds we have left, let me just go down the row, maybe 10 seconds. What do you want to leave the audience with here, GEOINT?
So for me, it's all about outcome-based thinking. It's not about what you get or what I get out of the partnership. It's about what we get and what we're able to do with it as an enterprise.
Yeah, I would just underscore diversity of thought and perspective. I think that's one thing. The fact that liberal arts and technology are really being held together in the same vein in this conference is really impressive to me. And so how we can really continue that diversity of thought and perspective to really drive the enterprise.
I'll go back to what I started about before where I said that building bridges is insufficient because that's all that is the connection. It's really what you do after with that connection that's the most important piece.
Just that we have a huge good government opportunity here to, the collect once, use many times, and the more that we've got those collaborations in place up front, the better use we're going to make of each pixel and each investment.
Technology will only enable the effects that we seek to create. There's some fantastic examples here in this room today, but it is humans that will shape and conduct the operations. The culture in which you employ the technology and the leadership that you lead your team with will create the right effect. Culture, leadership. and learn how to play rugby.
So with that, I just want to emphasize a point, which is we're all part of this global GEOINT enterprise together. We each have a responsibility to realize its potential. So it's not us, it is us as a collective. And we have a responsibility to bring our enterprise and operations together in a way that would make that potential real. So with that, please join me in a round of applause for our panel members. And have a great afternoon.